She was just another woman in line until her card was declined. And a quiet stranger stepped in with a kind gesture. Not knowing the woman he helped was the CEO of the entire building he worked in, and she had been watching him long before he noticed her. What happened next changed both of their lives forever in a way no one saw coming. If you're new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us where you are watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The cafe was already buzzing when Nora Wynn stepped inside, the smell of ground beans floating like a promise in the air. Chairs scraped against the tiled floor, and voices rose above the hum of the espresso machine. It was one of those early mornings where the sky was still figuring out whether to stay gray or turn gold. Nora moved quietly, dressed in a plain olive coat and soft leather flats, her hair tied back loosely, a tote bag over one shoulder and a phone in her hand. She looked like any other young woman racing the clock for Café Nash wasn't. Not really. Nora Wynn was the founder and CEO of Luma Breathe, a wellness tech company that had recently landed on the front page of 3 industry journals. But she liked mornings like these, slipping in unnoticed, listening more than speaking, blending in with the crowd of office workers who had no idea. The woman standing beside them was on Forbes' list of women to watch. Barista greeted her with a practiced smile. "Good morning. What can I get started for you?" "Large oat latte, no sweetener, extra hot," Nora replied, eyes still on the email she was typing one hand. The barista tapped the screen. "That'll be $6.65. Nora reached into her tote, brushing past her tablet, charger, receipts, then paused. Her wallet wasn't there. She blinked, checked again, dug into the side pocket. Nothing. A tiny jolt of panic tapped at her chest. "Sorry," she said quickly, lifting her eyes. "I think I left my wallet at my office upstairs. Could you maybe hold the order for just a minute? I can run up." And the barista's smile tightened. The line behind her had grown, a few customers shifting impatiently. Someone sighed audibly. That's when a voice spoke, low and calm, from just behind her. "Don't worry, it's just coffee. Happens to all of us." Nora turned, startled. Behind her stood a man wearing a navy blue work shirt. His name tag read Julian. A badge clipped to his belt said he worked security for the building. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his eyes warm but unreadable before she could protest. He had already stepped forward, raised his phone to the reader. A soft beep and the payment was made. The barista nodded and moved on. "Thank you," Nora said, reaching for her cup. "But really, you didn't have to do that." "I know," Julian said, handing her the drink. "But if it were me, you'd do the same." His voice held no pity, no performance, just plain kindness, steady and simple. He wasn't trying to impress her. He didn't even seem curious about her as she took the cup. The lid shifted slightly. A drop of coffee splashed onto her coat's collar. "Great," she muttered under her breath. Julian reached into his back pocket, pulled out a folded napkin, and stepped a little closer. Not too close, just enough to gently dab at the stain. His movements were precise and respectful. Then he pulled back, offering the napkin with a small smile. "Mostly gone," he said. Nora blinked. Something about the moment froze in time. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "What's your name?" she asked. Finale glanced back as he turned to go. "Julian," he said, then slipped out through the side exit near the elevator. Nora stood still, coffee in one hand, napkin in the other, the smell of roasted beans still thick around her. People behind her moved up in line. The barista called another name, but she didn't hear it. She looked at the napkin again, the corner stained faintly with coffee, still warm. She had met thousands of people in her life, spoken at conferences, and praised by investors, followed by media. But none of them had ever just helped her without knowing who she was, without asking, without staying to hear thank you. She walked toward the elevator slowly, sipping her latte. It tasted richer than usual, not just because of the roast, but because someone had offered it without expecting anything in return. Somewhere between the ground floor and the 30th, a thought pressed gently into her mind like steam from a hot cup. Maybe kindness wasn't about grand gestures. Maybe it was about noticing when someone drops their wallet, when their card fails, when their shoulders slump just a little, and doing something before they even ask as the elevator doors open and she stepped into her office. Nora's thoughts weren't on her first meeting anymore. They were somewhere else entirely, back downstairs with a quiet man named Julian, and a coffee she wouldn't soon forget. The light from Nora's office window fell in soft golden strips across her desk. Outside, the sky was still deciding whether it wanted to clear or stay heavy with clouds. Inside her office, everything was clean lines and quiet surfaces, a potted fern in the corner, a stack of applications waiting in a neat row, and the low hum of her air purifier filling the silent shay had blocked this time out of her calendar. No calls, no meetings, just an hour to read through the shortlisted candidates for the company's new Innovation Fellowship. It was a program close to her heart, a chance for voices that didn't always get heard to find space. A second door, as she called it, for those who didn't walk the usual path. Nora flipped through resumes quickly but carefully, her eyes moving from one column to the next. Education, experience, cover letter, references. Some stood out, others blurred together. She made small notes in the margin with a silver pen. Thoughtful words like strong sense of initiative, or too polished, lacks grit. Then she turned over a folder and stopped, her hand frozen. In midair, her heart gave a strange lurch. The name on the top line read Julian Hart. She sat back in her chair, eyes narrowing slightly. Julian Hart, she whispered aloud, as if the name itself carried the warmth of a memory. Her mind flipped backward like pages in a book. The café, the calm voice, the napkin. The café glanced at the status mark written in red at the top of the page. Rejected, it said. Resume incomplete. Unexplained gap in employment. Move to discard pile. Nora frowned. She pulled the folder closer. Something in her chest tightened. She flipped open the pages and began reading properly. This time with the weight of attention she usually reserved for her most critical decisions. Previous role: systems analyst at a mid-sized tech firm, 7 years in the role, 2 promotions, solid performance, and then the gap. 3 years with no explanation other than a quiet line under personal leave. No dramatic story, no details, just space. Her fingers hovered over the page. She felt something old and familiar stir inside her. The feeling that there was more under the surface, more than bullet points and buzzwords could capture. Julian Hart had wiped coffee from her coat with the care of someone who had lost something before. He hadn't asked her name, hadn't waited for thanks. He had simply stepped in when she needed help and walked away. Nora opened her laptop and started typing. She searched his name in the internal database, checked the digital records, skinned his application file again, then moved on to public data. Slowly the puzzle came together. An old article surfaced from a local news outlet, small print, buried beneath real estate reports and weekend events. It mentioned a software developer named Julian Hart, who had left his role suddenly after a family accident. The details were sparse, but one photo showed him standing at a quiet memorial site holding a white rose, his shoulders slightly hunched, his expression unreadable. Nora sat still for a long time after that, her screen glowing softly in the dim light of her office. She turned the resume over again, read the cover letter one more time. At the bottom, in the additional comment section, was one final line, not looking for pity, just purpose. She read it twice, 3 times, and each time the words sounded quieter and stronger. She picked up her pen again, and this time she didn't write rejected. Instead, she wrote 3 words in thick black ink. Priority review. She underlined them on Seth, and she stood up, walked across the room to her assistant's desk, and placed the folder gently on top of the urgent file tray. Add this name to the one-on-one list, she said without looking up. I want to meet him myself. No panel, just him and me. Her assistant blinked, surprised. He was already rejected, she said cautiously. Not anymore, Nora replied, already walking back toward her office. Hours later, as evening fell, and the office lights dimmed one by one, Nora stood by the tall window in her corner suite. The city below looked like a circuit board glowing with energy. But her thoughts weren't on the skyline or the numbers waiting on her desk. They were on a man who had quietly offered help when no one else had noticed, and a resume someone had dismissed because it didn't fit a perfect mold, had always believed that the strongest people didn't shout their stories. They carried them quietly like a folded napkin in a back pocket, and sometimes all it took was one moment of stillness to recognize them. She looked at the planner on her desk, flipped it open, circled next Thursday, and wrote in clear letters, "Meeting, Julian Hart. This time, she would be the one listening." The meeting room on the 12th floor wasn't grand. It had no fancy paintings or sparkling city views, just a long table, 2 chairs, and a soft hum from the air vent above. The lights were warm, not bright, and a tray of water with 2 clean glasses sat between them like a quiet offering of peace. Julian Hart sat on one side, his back straight, but his shoulders not tense. He wore a clean shirt, soft gray, with sleeves rolled just past his wrists, no tie, no briefcase, just a simple folder in his hands and calm eyes watching the door. Nora walked in with a quiet nod. She was dressed in navy today, a loose blouse and tailored pants, simple but certain. Her heels barely made a sound as she crossed the room and sat down across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she smiled slightly, not the smile she gave in investor meetings, but something softer, something real. "Thank you for coming," she said, reaching for her notebook. "I wanted to talk with you personally, beyond the usual application process." Julian nodded once. "I was surprised to be called in," he said. "I didn't think my file would get past the first filter." "It almost didn't," Nora admitted, tapping the folder gently. "But I recognized your name." He raised an eyebrow, curious but quiet, and she saw it in his eyes, the flicker of memory. "The moment at the cafe. I believe we met once," she said gently. "You paid for my coffee." "When my card didn't work," Julian blinked. Then a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't realize that was you." "I remember," she said simply, "because you didn't wait for thanks." Silence settled between them for a moment, calm and kind, not awkward, just the kind that lets the truth breathe. "I read your file," she continued. "But more importantly, I read what others didn't." She opened his folder, flipping through pages others had skimmed, pausing at the note he'd written at the bottom. "Not looking for pity, just purpose," she read aloud, then looked up at him. Julian nodded slowly. "I meant that," he said. "I've had titles before, offices, teams, but after what happened, I needed to rebuild from a place that wasn't wrapped in status or pity. I wanted to contribute, not be pitied." "And now," Nora asked, "are you ready to lead again?" He hesitated, not out of fear, but reflection. "I'm ready to serve the work," he said, "whether it's leading or supporting. I want to be where I can be useful." Nora leaned back, studying him, not as a hiring manager, but as a person who had once felt like an outsider herself. Someone who had once knocked on doors that didn't open until she built her own. "You were overqualified for the roles we posted," she said, "but I didn't call you in for those." She slid a new envelope across the table, thick and unsealed. Julian looked at it, then slowly opened it. Inside was a formal offer for a senior consultant position in the company's innovation branch. The same branch that would shape the future of the company's next big venture. His eyes stayed on the paper for a moment, then lifted to hers. "This is more than I expected," he said. "It's what you've earned," Nora replied. "Not because you helped me with coffee, but because I believe in how you see things. Not just systems, but people." He read the offer again, carefully, respectfully, then placed it down on the table with steady hands. "I'll accept," he said, "but with one condition." Nora tilted her head, curious. "Go on." "I want to earn it like anyone else," he said. "No shortcuts, no special pass." "You already did," she said softly, "by showing up quietly when no one was watching." They stood together, and for the first time in a long while, Julian felt something settle inside him. Not relief, not pride, but something quieter. A sense that his story was no longer stuck in the past. It was beginning again that night. As he returned to his small apartment above the bookstore, he placed the offer letter on his kitchen table. Beside an old photograph of his brother and a worn copy of a book they once read together, didn't smile big. He didn't call anyone. He just stood there for a while, letting the moment breathe a bez sometimes. The biggest turns in life happen not with a shout, but with a quiet yes in a small room, with warm lights and someone finally willing to see. More than a resume, the rain had stopped just before dusk, leaving behind puddles that shimmered like glass on the pavement. Inside the building, the lights glowed warmly through the windows as the evening shift ended and most people headed home. But on the 23rd floor, two lights still burned quietly, one in the far corner where Julian sat reviewing a system update, and one in Nora's office, where she stood staring at a whiteboard full of ideas that hadn't quite connected, yet the hum of the city outside was distant. Muffled, the way it always felt after a long day, Nora rubbed her eyes gently, her head heavy with numbers, timelines, and unanswered emails. Her heels were off, tucked under her desk, and her blazer was draped across her chair. A sigh escaped. Her lips, soft and tired, didn't hear the door open. Not at first, but then she smelled it. Chamomile, warm and familiar. She looked up and saw a mug resting on the corner of her desk, and beside it, a folded note written in the same calm handwriting she remembered from the meeting room. "You look tired." "The world can wait." She reached for the mug slowly, her fingers brushing the note. Her heart shifted in her chest. No one had said anything like that to her in years. Not without expecting something in return, not without checking her calendar. First be the time she looked toward the hallway. Julian was already gone, his desk light off. His presence, like a quiet kindness that never needed to announce itself, next morning brought chaos. A leaked report had caused confusion across departments. Emails flooded her inbox. Calls came in from advisors, and in the emergency meeting that followed, she found herself at the center of a storm of questions. Pointed, professional, but edged with blame. Nora sat straight, her voice steady. But inside she felt the weight of it all pressing down like a sky about to break. Then Julian spoke, his voice calm, sure, respectful if we're assigning responsibility. He said, "Let's be clear, this wasn't on Nora's shoulders, the communication. Error came from my team, and I own that." The room shifted. The silence was sharp. Then softer. "While we were sending emails," he added, "she was here late fixing the gaps we missed. So if we're pointing fingers, maybe we should start by asking how to work better together. Not who to blame first." Nora didn't speak, not right away, but her eyes found his across the table, and in that glance was something that went beyond gratitude. It was recognition. After the meeting, as they walked out side by side, she looked at him and asked quietly, "Why did you say that back as you were standing alone?" He said, "And I know what that feels like." Her steps slowed, not from doubt, but from something gentler, something like being understood. That evening, the gala for the company's 5-year milestone unfolded in a hall lit by golden lights and low music. Suits and gowns moved like waves through the room. Toasts were made, glasses clinked, and laughter echoed under the high ceilings. Nora stood near the back at first, not hiding, just breathing. Her midnight dress shimmered when she turned, and a soft navy shawl wrapped around her shoulders, one that hadn't been there when she entered. Julian had seen her shiver by the entrance, and without a word, had placed it over her shoulders before she noticed. His hand brushing hers for just a moment when the final presentation ended, and the applause faded. Nora stepped outside onto the terrace. The air was cooler now, quiet above the city. Julian followed a few steps behind. Not too close, just there. As he always seemed to, fireworks began in the distance. Soft bursts of color blooming over the skyline. Nora watched the lights, then turned to him. Her voice lowy. "Do you always notice the small things?" She paused, then answered with the kind of honesty that doesn't try to impress, "Because I know what it's like when no one does." She looked at him, really looked, and something inside her softened. The kind of soft that comes after years of being strong. She stood like that for a while. Hands brushing, no words needed, just the sound of distant fireworks, and two people who had learned to speak quietly in a world that often shouted. Later that week, Nora gave a speech at the National Conference on Inclusive Leadership. She spoke of second chances, of resumes almost missed, of moments that start with something as simple as kindness in the crowd. Julian stood near the back, watching, unnoticed by most, just the way he liked it afterward. As the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, she found him near the lobby window, the reflection of the city behind him. You stood back. She said he always do, he replied with a smile. Stepped closer and took his hand gently. You're the reason I stood up there. She said. He shook his head slowly. You were always meant to stand there. They didn't need big words, just small ones that meant everything. The next morning, they met again at the same café where it had all begun. The line was shorter now, the lights warmer. The barista almost recognized them. Nora pulled out her card with a playful smirk. What if it declines again? She asked it. Then I'll scan mine, Julian said with a quiet laugh. Some habits are hard to break. As they sat by the window, watching the city begin again, Nora reached for her cup and looked at him. You know, this was never just about the cafino, he said, his thumb brushing gently against her hand. It was about seeing someone and choosing to stay, and in the stillness between them, something new began to bloom. Not fast, not loud, but real, and that, they both knew, was more than enough.